Hi, this will be a presentation of our paper Fill-in Fabrics, Body-Aware Self-Supervised Inpainting for Virtual Try-On. This work was done during a research internship at Decathlon. To begin, we will start by motivation where we talk about the problem and discuss the limitations in previous work. We then describe our proposed method in detail. We also show experiment results with comparison to recent approaches as well as conduct ablation and robustness studies. Finally, we will end with a conclusion. The core objective of image-based virtual try-on is to synthesize a person image with a new clothing, given the image of the person wearing a different clothing item and the new clothing item as inputs. This can be broken down into different subtasks, namely semantic segmentation, image warping, image compositing, and synthesis. The latter is very challenging as a synthetic image must preserve the person's identity, pose, and shape. Also, the occluded body parts in a clothing item should be correctly synthesized. Moreover, the clothing item should accurately fit the pose and shape of the person, and the clothing details of the clothing should also be preserved, such as logo, texture, and embroidery. Recent works formulate virtual try-on as a supervised learning problem by following two major steps. Warp the clothing image to fit the human body or shape and fuse the warped clothing with the person image. The objective functions are not perceptually motivated, which do not enforce any global context and semantics necessary to accurately model the human and clothing interaction for compositing and synthesis. Further, they do not provide robustness performance for in-the-wild images. Therefore, it remains an open question as to how these methods would generalize in the wild, and it is of vital importance to develop methods that can overcome these challenges for highly photorealistic virtual try-on. These limitations result in a number of failure cases. There exists a significant gap towards photorealism as they tend to not only fail on complex pose and shape of the person, but also in synthesizing initially occluded body parts, such as in long-sleeve clothing. These methods also fail to preserve the logo, texture, and embroidery of the clothing, as well as the overall shape of the clothing item, and results in blurry and unrealistic outputs. To address these limitations, we propose a fill-in fabrics framework, which is a self-supervised conditional generative adversarial network based framework comprised of a fabricator and a unified virtual try-on pipeline with a segmenter, warper, and fuser. The fabricator aims to reconstruct the clothing image when provided with a masked clothing as input and learns the overall structure of the clothing by filling in fabrics. The fabricator is used as a form of self-supervised pre-training for the warper. A virtual try-on pipeline is then trained by transferring the learned representations from the fabricator to warper in an effort to warp and refine the target clothing. To enforce global context at multiple scales for accurate modeling of human and clothing interaction to better fit the pose and shape of the person, we also propose to use a multi-scale structural constraint to warp and refine the target clothing. The proposed framework can synthesize more realistic logo, texture, and embroidery of the target clothing and also tackles well person images with complex poses and shape. The proposed FIFA framework consists of a fabricator and a unified virtual try-on pipeline consisting of a segmenter, warper, and fuser. Given a partial input, we first use the fabricator to reconstruct the full clothing details and learn the overall structure of the clothing, such as texture, full and half sleeve. This is used as a pretext task for the warper. For virtual try-on, given a person and clothing item image, we use segmenter to predict the masked body parts of the reference person as well as the masked target clothing regions. Third, we employ a warper to warp the target clothing image such that it fits the masked clothing region with the aim to capture the pose and shape of the person. Finally, the fuser integrates outputs from the segmenter warper in order to synthesize the final try-on image. Here we visually compare the performance of our proposed method with CP-Viton Plus and ACGPN, which are state-of-the-art virtual try-on baselines. Each row shows a person virtually trying on different clothing items. Overall, these baselines tend to preserve the complex pose of the reference person, the complex texture and embroidery of the target clothing, and also the clothing types. By comparison, our FIFA method is able to warp the target clothing in the case of complex poses and preserves well the body parts. It benefits from the synergy between the MCM objective and the MSC constraint, which helps preserve the pose of the person, capture the fine details of the target clothing, as well as the global structure of the clothing. In summary, this helps not only to preserve the logo texture and embroidery, but also the type of target clothing, and yields an output having less artifacts and retains clear body parts, achieving more photorealistic try-on results. We also find that FIFA is able to better preserve the skin color of the person and accurately synthesize the person's body parts which were initially occluded. In addition, it can distinguish between front and back part of the clothing items. Following prior work, we used the structural similarity that captures image level similarity, as well as the Fréchet inception distance that captures the distributional similarity. Both metrics are commonly used for benchmarking try-on methods to quantify the visual difference between the generated and the real reference images. Higher scores of SSIM and lower scores of FID indicate higher quality of the synthesized results. Here we show that FIFA consistently outperforms all baselines, achieving significant improvements over the strongest ACGPN baseline on easy, medium, and hard cases in the Viton dataset. FIFA also outperforms ACGPN with a relative improvement of 19% in terms of FID. Interestingly, our FIFA model yields significant relative improvements of around 5 and 43% over cloth flow in terms of SSIM and FID. It is worth pointing out that cloth flow operates on streams such as optical flow maps to predict the movement of clothes and is computationally expensive, while our method is purely an image-based virtual try-on approach operating on only image pixels. Our method also outperforms the transformer-based CIT baseline with a relative improvement of 7% in terms of SSIM. This better performance of our approach is significant because transformers are built on self-attention and operates are quite strong in modeling the global context between the person and clothing. Here we show the benefit of using MCM in preserving the pose and logo as well as accurately warping the target clothing. It can be seen that MCM is able to preserve the logo of the target clothing, whereas without MCM the logo is completely lost. MCM also helps in accurately preserving and synthesizing the body parts in complex poses, such as accurately warping the target clothing. Notice that without MCM there is a problem of unnecessarily editing regions of the target clothing. This is largely attributed to the richer learning signal provided by MCM rather than just using the supervised objective of predicting the warped clothing which fits the reference person, enabling our approach to accurately model the interactions between the target clothing and the reference person clothing. Here we show that per pixel based image and perceptual based losses is not enough to capture the global context, and semantics, which are necessary for preserving the shape of the person and also realistically synthesizing body parts. The per pixel based loss function L1 measures the distance between pixels. On the other hand, the perceptual based law LVGG quantifies the significance between the reconstructed and ground truth, but only at a latent representation level. Also, it tends to generate artifacts, which is in line with our findings. We show that by adding MSC, our method is able to better tackle these issues and learn to exploit context at different scales. While CP Python Plus and ACGPen baselines introduce artifacts and do not preserve well the shape of the person. We also test the generalizability and found that FIFA is better against ACGPen model. We introduced a body-aware self-supervised inpainting framework for image-based virtual try-on by focusing on tackling complex poses. Our proposed method yields better performance in terms of previous baselines by combining strengths of mask cloth modeling and the multi-scale structural constraint.